The envelope arrived on a Thursday between the electric bill and a coupon for dentures I didn't need. I set it on the kitchen counter with the rest of the mail, making tea the way I always did, standing up, one hand on the kettle, the other already reaching for the next task because sitting felt like wasting time, like admitting I had nothing important to do. The house was quiet in that particular way that pressed against my eardrums, the kind of silence that had settled in after Robert died 8 years ago and never quite lifted, even when Charlotte visited with her husband and talked over me about property values and retirement communities while helping themselves to my good china. I picked up the envelope while the tea steeped. County Clerk's office, it said across the top, in official blue ink, the kind that doesn't smudge when you touch it. Inside was a single sheet with a case number, a date, and an address I knew better than my own heartbeat, because it was my address, the house Robert and I bought in 1978, with money we'd saved for 6 years, living in that cramped apartment above the dry cleaner where the smell of chemicals seeped into everything we owned. The document used words like public auction and pursuant to power of attorney and scheduled sale. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me. I stood there in my kitchen with late afternoon sun slanting through the window over the sink, illuminating dust I hadn't noticed before, and I felt something cold and specific settle into my chest, just left of centre, where Robert used to place his hand when we danced. I called Charlotte's number from the phone mounted on the wall, the one with the long cord that let you pace while you talked. Though I didn't pace, I stood very still. "Mom." Her voice had that particular brightness that meant she was multitasking, probably scrolling through her phone or signing forms for her husband's contracting business, the one that kept expanding into bigger offices while they kept suggesting I sell this house because it was too much space for one person. "I received a letter from the county," I said, keeping my voice level. The way I'd learned to keep it level when she visited and moved things in my house without asking, shifted my furniture to update the flow, threw away my magazines because they were clutter. Silence on her end. Then a sigh. "Yes. We were going to tell you this weekend." We, not I. We. As if this were something they'd discussed together, planned together, decided together about my life, my home, the place where I'd raised her, where Robert and I had painted every room ourselves that first summer, where I still slept on his side of the bed sometimes because it smelled like him, even though it couldn't possibly after all these years. "You're selling my house." Not a question, a statement. Testing the words in my mouth, seeing how they felt, what shape they made. "It's for your safety, Mom. You're 76. The stairs alone." "I asked you to have power of attorney for medical decisions," I said quietly, each word deliberate, placed carefully like stones across a stream. "For hospitals, in case something happened. And property management," she added quickly, smoothly, the way she'd learned to smooth over objections in her years working in real estate before she married David and stopped working but never stopped managing. "It's all in the paperwork you signed. Dad's lawyer set it up, remember? I did remember. Robert's lawyer, Tom Morrison, the one who'd handled our will after Robert's diagnosis, who'd explained so carefully about making sure someone could handle things. If I became unable to, I remembered signing papers in his office with its wood panelling and leather chairs, remembered Charlotte sitting beside me, squeezing my hand, saying, "It's okay, Mom, this is just for emergencies." And I'd believed her, because she was my daughter and I trusted her. And I was tired from months of watching Robert die by increments. "The auction is in 3 weeks," Charlotte continued, and I could hear her moving now, heels clicking on hardwood, a door closing. "We've already got interest from 2 developers. The neighborhood's hot right now. This way you'll have money for a really nice assisted living place. We've been looking." I hung up, not slamming, just pressed the button on the receiver and stood there, with my hand on the phone, feeling the plastic warming under my palm. The tea had gone cold. I poured it down the sink and watched the light brown liquid swirl down the drain, gone, just like that, as if it had never existed. My reflection in the window over the sink looked back at me. A woman with grey hair she still wore long, because Robert had loved it that way, with lines around her mouth from smiling, from living, from 76 years of being someone. But Charlotte didn't see a someone. She saw a problem to be solved, a risk to be managed, an asset to be liquidated. She saw square footage and equity and an empty nester who'd be so much happier in a studio apartment, with a kitchenette and scheduled activities and someone else deciding when lights out would be. The phone rang. Charlotte, probably. I looked at it ringing there on the wall, its insistent electronic trill cutting through the silence, and I did something I'd never done before. I didn't answer. The ringing stopped. Started again. Stopped. Started again. I walked away from it. Through the living room where Charlotte had rearranged my furniture last month to make better use of natural light, past the dining room table where Robert and I used to do our taxes together every April, spreading papers across the oak surface he'd refinished himself, arguing good-naturedly about deductions while drinking terrible wine. In our bedroom, my bedroom now, though I still thought of it as ours, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands. 76-year-old hands, spotted with age, knuckles starting to swell with arthritis. Robert had also developed in his 70s, back when we thought we'd have 20 more years together instead of the 3 we got. These hands had signed away my house without knowing it, had trusted my daughter, had believed that just for emergencies meant just for emergencies. The phone kept ringing in the kitchen, faint now but persistent, and I understood with sudden clarity that Charlotte would keep calling, keep managing, keep deciding what was best for me until I stopped her, or until there was nothing left of me to stop. I didn't sleep that night. Not the restless half-sleep of old age where you drift between dreams and waking, but a sharp, alert wakefulness that felt almost young, almost powerful, as if some part of me that had been drowsy for years had suddenly remembered what it meant to be awake. At 2 in the morning, I got up and walked through the house, turning on lights. Every light, every room. The living room with its built-in bookshelves Robert had installed the summer Charlotte turned 12, spending his weekends with a level and power drill, determined to get it perfect, because books deserve a good home, Ellie. The kitchen, where I'd made 34 Thanksgiving dinners, where Charlotte had stood on a step stool to help me roll pie dough. Flour dusting her nose, laughing. The guest room that had been her room still painted the pale yellow she'd chosen at 16, though she'd lived in her own house for 23 years now. The basement where Robert's workshop stood untouched, his tools still hanging on their pegboard outlines, waiting for hands that would never come back to claim them. I touched things as I walked. The doorframe where we'd marked Charlotte's height every birthday. The living room radiator cover with its hidden scratch from when she'd learned to ride her bike indoors during a rainstorm and crashed into it. The kitchen counter where Robert used to leave me notes on Monday mornings before heading to his shift at the plant. Silly messages like, "Don't forget to be beautifuls," and "The coffee loves you." This house held 46 years of my life, counted in coffee stains and patched drywall, and the particular creak of the third stair that Robert had tried to fix 6 times before admitting defeat. It held my marriage, my motherhood, my grief, my small daily rituals of survival. Every corner knew me. Every room had watched me become whoever I was now, and Charlotte wanted to sell it like it was just property, just equity, just a transaction that came with a convenient solution to the problem of her aging mother. I stood in the living room as dawn started to grey the windows and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I would fight, not with tears or pleading, or guilt trips about being her mother, about how hurt I was, about family loyalty and disappointment. Not with the emotional weapons I'd been taught women my age were supposed to use when we felt small and powerless. I would fight the way she was fighting, with paperwork, with lawyers, with the same cold practicality she'd used when she signed my house away. At 8:30 Friday morning, I was standing outside Thomas Wright's office when he arrived carrying his briefcase and a paper cup of coffee, squinting against the morning sun. He'd taken over Tom Morrison's practice when Tom retired 5 years ago, inherited all of Tom's files, including mine, though we'd never met. He was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with greying hair, and reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. "Mrs. Hartley?" He looked confused, checking his phone. "I don't have you down for an appointment." "I know." My voice came out steady. "I need a lawyer. It's urgent. And I can pay." That last part mattered. I saw it register in his eyes, the quick professional assessment. I wasn't some confused elderly woman wandering in off the street. I was a potential client with a problem and resources. He unlocked the door. His office smelled like old paper and coffee, with law books lining the walls and a desk covered in neat stacks of manila folders. I sat in the chair across from him and laid the auction notice on his desk between us like evidence. "My daughter has power of attorney," I said, keeping my words precise, clear. "She's using it to sell my house without my permission. I signed those papers 8 years ago for medical decisions and emergencies, not this." Thomas picked up the notice, read it carefully, his expression neutral. Then he opened a file cabinet, pulled out what must have been my file, and flipped through pages until he found what he was looking for. He read it, put it down, looked at me with something that might have been sympathy, but felt more like recognition. "Mrs. Hartley, the power of attorney your husband's lawyer drew up does include property management and financial decisions. It's pretty broadly written." He paused. "That said, there are grounds for revocation. If you're mentally competent and can demonstrate coercion or abuse of authority." "I'm competent," I said flatly. "I balanced my checkbook yesterday. I can tell you the date, the president, my social security number, and what I had for breakfast. I'm not confused. I'm angry." A small smile. "I can see that. Can you stop the auction?" He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen. "Yes, but it's going to require immediate action. We'll need to file for an emergency injunction, draft and notarize a revocation of the power of attorney, and probably freeze your accounts to prevent any attempt to liquidate assets before the hearing. Your daughter's not going to be happy." "My daughter," I said, each word a small stone, stopped caring about my happiness when she decided I was a problem to be solved. We spent 3 hours in that office going through everything. The original power of attorney, my bank statements, the deed to my house, my marriage certificate and Robert's death certificate, and all the paperwork that proved I was who I said I was, that this house was mine, that Charlotte had no right. By noon, I'd signed a new document revoking Charlotte's authority, notarized by Thomas's assistant, a young woman named Maria, who kept sneaking sympathetic glances at me when she thought I wasn't looking. "Monday morning, I'll file this with the county and notify the auction house," Thomas said, walking me to the door. "In the meantime, I'd suggest you secure your important documents: birth certificate, passport, bank information. If your daughter has keys to your house, she does. Consider changing the locks." I nodded, shook his hand. His palm was warm and dry and professional. "Mrs. Hartley," he said as I turned to leave, "off the record? Good for you." I drove home slowly, carefully, my hands tight on the wheel, and when I pulled into my driveway and saw my house sitting there solid and real in the afternoon sun, something unlocked in my chest that I hadn't even realized was clenched. This was mine, this life, this space, this choice. Charlotte called 6 times over the weekend. I didn't answer. She drove by on Saturday evening. I saw her car slow down as it passed, saw her face in the driver's seat window looking toward the house, trying to see if I was home. If I was okay, if I needed managing, I sat in the living room with all the lights off and didn't move until she drove away. Sunday, I made coffee the way Robert used to make it, strong and bitter, in the French press we'd gotten as a wedding gift from his sister Anne, who'd said we'd need caffeine to survive marriage. And she'd been right, though not in the way she meant. I sat at the kitchen table, sat, not stood, and drank it slowly while looking at the papers Thomas had given me. Legal words, official language. The kind of power that didn't come from volume or persistence, but from documents and signatures and county clerks who didn't care about feelings, only facts. The phone rang. Charlotte again, her 7th call. I watched it ring, that old beige wall phone that had been here since 1982, that had taken calls about Robert's first cancer scare and Charlotte's high school graduation and the day we paid off the mortgage. It had always been answered. Every ring, every call, every summons. Not anymore. The silence after it stopped ringing felt different than it had before Thomas's office. It felt earned. Monday morning at 9:15, I walked into First National Bank, where I'd done my banking for 43 years, since Robert and I opened our first joint account with $73 and a dream of eventually affording a house with a yard. The branch manager was a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd helped me navigate Robert's life insurance payout and the transfer of accounts into my name after he died. She smiled when she saw me, that professional warmth that said she remembered my name even if she dealt with hundreds of customers. "Mrs. Hartley, how can I help you today?" "I need to freeze all account access for anyone with power of attorney," I said, sitting in the chair across from her desk, my purse in my lap, my hands folded over it. "And I need to remove my daughter Charlotte from any joint accounts or authorized user status." The smile didn't fade, but it changed, became more careful. "May I ask why?" I pulled out the notarized revocation Thomas had drawn up and slid it across her desk. "My daughter is attempting to sell my house without my knowledge or consent. I've revoked her power of attorney. I need to ensure she can't access my funds to prevent me from securing legal representation or bidding at the auction." Patricia read the document slowly, her face neutral, but I saw her shoulders shift slightly, saw her glance at me with something that looked like the beginning of respect. "I'll need to make copies of this and file it with our legal department," she said. "It'll take about 48 hours to process the freeze on the POA access. For the authorized user removal, I can do that immediately if you have your account information." We spent an hour going through everything: checking account, savings, the CD that was still in Robert's and my, names that I'd never bothered to update, because it felt like erasing him somehow. Patricia made notes, printed forms, asked me to sign in triplicate. "Mrs. Hartley," she said when we were done, her voice quieter now, more personal, "I see this more often than you'd think. Adult children who mean well, but—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "You're doing the right thing. Protecting yourself isn't selfish." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and left with copies of all the paperwork in a folder she'd given me, official and stamped and real. The auction was in 17 days. That evening I sat at Robert's old desk in the corner of our bedroom and went through the files I'd kept for 8 years since his death, all the records I'd maintained, because I was responsible, because I kept track of things, because someone had to be the adult even when that someone was elderly and supposed to be taken care of instead of taking care. Bank statements, tax returns. The appraisal we'd gotten on the house in 2019 when Charlotte first started suggesting we downsize. Receipts for the new roof in 2021. Utilities, insurance, the precise accounting of a life lived within budget. Within means within the careful boundaries of people who came of age during Carter's recession and learned that money was finite and must be respected. I did the math 3 times to be sure. The house had been appraised at $340,000 4 years ago. Property values in our neighborhood had increased approximately 15% since then, based on the listings I'd seen in the local paper. Assuming a conservative auction estimate of $375,000, and assuming Charlotte and David had set a reasonable reserve, I would need at least $380,000 to $400,000 to ensure I could outbid any interested buyers. My savings account held $127,000, mostly from Robert's life insurance and our combined retirement savings. The CD had $85,000, mature in 3 months but accessible with a penalty. I had $23,000 in checking, $235,000 total. Maybe $250,000 if I liquidated my small investment account with its 3 ETFs that Robert had bought because his friend Jerry said they were solid. Not enough. The realization sat in my stomach like cold metal. I could revoke Charlotte's authority. I could freeze my accounts. I could hire lawyers and file injunctions and show up at the auction with all the righteous anger of a woman defending her home. But I couldn't outbid Charlotte if she decided to buy it herself with David's contractor money, with the leveraged profits from their 4 rental properties, with all the resources of 2 people in their early 50s at the height of their earning years. I sat there at Robert's desk with his old lamp casting shadows across columns of numbers, and felt something sharp and specific inside my chest that might have been despair, except despair implied surrender. This wasn't surrender. This was calculation. Tuesday evening, my granddaughter Rose called. Charlotte's daughter, 23 years old and working at a non-profit in Minneapolis that did something with urban gardens and community organizing. She FaceTimed from her tiny apartment kitchen where I could see plants hanging in the window. Behind her, and a poster about labor rights, Grandma. Her face was worried, young, familiar in the way that made my throat tight. Mum said you hung up on her? That you're being difficult about the house sale? Did she tell you she's selling my house without asking me? Rose's expression shifted, became careful. She said it was for your safety, that you agreed. I agreed to give her medical power of attorney 8 years ago when your grandfather was dying. I did not agree to let her sell my home like I'm already dead." Silence on the screen. Rose bit her lip, a gesture so much like Charlotte at that age that it hurt. "The auction's on the 30th, she said finally, quietly. Saturday, 2 p.m. at the County Auction House on Maple Street. Mum and Dad are planning to go."
How do you know?
"She asked me to come. Said it would be good for me to see how real estate transactions work." Rose's voice was dry, adult, knowing. I told her I had to work.
Thank you for telling me.
"Grandma, are you okay? Like really okay?" I looked at this girl, this young woman, who was Robert's eyes and my stubbornness and Charlotte's intelligence, all mixed together into someone who still believed the world could be fair if you fought hard enough. "I'm going to be," I said, and meant it. After we hung up, I wrote down the details. Saturday, 2 p.m, County Auction House, Maple Street. 17 days became 14, became 10. And every day Charlotte called, and I didn't answer. And every day the silence in my house felt less like emptiness and more like space I was learning to inhabit differently. I broke the CD early, paying the penalty, $248,000 in liquid assets. Still not enough to guarantee victory, but enough to make a statement. Thomas called to say the injunction hearing was scheduled for Wednesday, 2 days before the auction. If the judge sides with us, it'll kill the sale outright. But county courts can be unpredictable with property disputes between family members. Some judges think adult children know best. And if the judge sides with Charlotte, then we fall back on your right to bid. You're the legal homeowner. You have every right to participate in the auction of your own property. The absurdity of that sentence, bid on my own home, compete for the right to keep living in rooms I'd painted and floors I'd scrubbed and spaces I'd filled with 46 years of daily life, should have made me laugh. Instead, it made me angry in a way that felt clean and cold and useful. I went through my closet and found the navy dress I'd worn to Robert's funeral still in its dry cleaning bag, the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 30th anniversary, the good shoes that hurt my feet but made me 2 inches taller. If I was going to fight for my home, I was going to look like someone who deserved to win. The injunction hearing on Wednesday was held in a courtroom that smelled like floor polish and old wood, with fluorescent lights that flickered slightly and made everyone look tired. Judge Morrison, no relation to Tom Morrison, though I wondered briefly about coincidences and small-town connections, was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses and an expression that suggested she'd heard every family dispute possible and believed none of them. Charlotte sat on the other side of the courtroom with David and their lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone. She looked at me once when I walked in with Thomas, and her face did something complicated that might have been hurt or anger or guilt. I didn't look away. I sat down and folded my hands in my lap and waited. The hearing took 45 minutes. Thomas presented the revocation, argued that the power of attorney had been obtained under false pretenses about its scope, emphasised my mental competency and financial stability. Charlotte's lawyer countered that I was elderly, living alone, that the house was too large to maintain, that Charlotte was acting in my best interests out of filial concern. "Your Honour," he said in a voice that managed to sound both respectful and condescending, "Mrs. Hartley is 76 years old. The property in question requires significant upkeep. Her daughter is simply trying to ensure her mother's safety and financial security in her declining years." I felt Thomas stiffen beside me, but Judge Morrison held up a hand before he could object. "Counsel," she said dryly, "I'm 71. I mow my own lawn. Unless you'd like to argue, I'm also in my declining years and unfit to make decisions." The lawyer backtracked quickly, too quickly. The judge noticed. She read through the documents in silence for what felt like an hour, but was probably 5 minutes, then looked up at Charlotte. "Mrs. Brennan, did your mother explicitly authorize you to sell her house? She gave me power of attorney." "That's not what I asked. Did she say, 'Charlotte, sell my house'?" Silence. Charlotte's hands were clenched in her lap. "Not in those exact words, no." "Did she say anything that you interpreted as permission to sell her house?" "She said she trusted me to make good decisions for her." "When was this?" 8 years ago, when my father was dying." Judge Morrison looked at me. "Mrs. Hartley, do you want to sell your house?" "No, Your Honour." "Are you mentally competent to make that decision?" "Yes, Your Honour." "Do you understand the financial and physical responsibilities of home ownership at your age?" "Yes, Your Honour. I've been handling them for 46 years." She made a note, looked at both lawyers. "The power of attorney is hereby revoked, effective immediately. The property auction scheduled for this Saturday is void. Mrs. Hartley retains full ownership and decision-making authority regarding her residence." She paused. "Mrs. Brennan, adult children do not get to decide when their parents are too old to make their own choices. If you're concerned about your mother's well-being, I suggest you try talking to her instead of around her." The gavel came down. Charlotte stood up, so fast her chair scraped across the floor. She looked at me across the courtroom with something in her eyes that was either rage or grief, and I couldn't tell which. Couldn't tell if she'd ever understand why this hurt more than any physical pain I'd ever endured. She left without speaking. David followed, his hand on her back, and I sat there feeling something that should have been triumph, but felt more like the morning after major surgery, raw, tender, changed. "Mrs. Hartley?" Thomas was smiling. "You won." I won. That evening I sat in Robert's chair, the green armchair by the window that had moulded to his shape over 30 years, that I'd avoided sitting in since his death because it felt like trespassing. And I sat there deliberate, claiming it, feeling the way the cushions gave under my weight differently than they had under his. The house was quiet, but it was my quiet, my silence, my space. I'd won, but I'd also lost something I couldn't name yet. Some fantasy I'd been carrying that Charlotte and I would somehow, someday, understand each other. That she'd see me not as a problem, but as a person. That we could be what I'd imagined mothers and daughters were supposed to be. Friends, allies, women who chose each other's company. The phone hadn't rung in 3 days. Friday morning, Rose came by unannounced, knocking on the door at 8 a.m. with a bag of bagels and 2 coffees from the shop downtown that made them the way Robert used to like them, with too much cream cheese. "I heard about the hearing," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, kissing my cheek. "Mum's not taking it well. I imagine not." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Rose had done homework in high school while I made dinner, where she'd told me about her first breakup and her college acceptance and her decision to move to Minneapolis for a job that paid barely enough to cover rent because it mattered, because someone had to do that work. "She thinks you're being stubborn," Rose said carefully. "That you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. What do you think?" Rose bit into her bagel, chewed thoughtfully. "I think she forgot you're a person. That you had a life before her, that you'll have a life after her. That you're not just mum or grandma, but Eleanor. Someone who makes choices." Something in my chest loosened. "She's scared," Rose continued. "Dad too. They're terrified something will happen to you here alone and they'll feel responsible. But that's their fear, not your responsibility." "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from you." She smiled, Robert's smile. "You never treated me like a project. You asked what I wanted. You listened when I said I wanted to do community work instead of law school like Mum wanted. You didn't try to manage me." We talked for an hour about her work, her partner Marcus, who I'd met once and liked, her plans to maybe someday have kids but not yet, not while she was still figuring out who she was. Normal conversation, the kind where no one was deciding what was best for anyone else. When she left, she hugged me hard. "I love you, Grandma. I'm proud of you." Saturday would have been the auction. I woke up at 6 a.m, even though there was nowhere I needed to be, no bidding to do, no competition for my own house. The navy dress hung on my closet door where I'd left it. Ready for a battle that wasn't happening. I made coffee, Robert's way, in the French press, and sat at the kitchen table with the window open, letting spring air into the house that smelled like lilacs from the bush he'd planted our first summer here. The phone rang at 9:30, an unknown number. I answered without thinking. "Mrs. Hartley?" A man's voice, professional. "This is Greg from Riverside Property Management. I'm calling about the listing for 1247 Sycamore Street. Our buyer was very interested and we saw the auction was cancelled. Is the property still potentially for sale?" "No," I said clearly. "It's not for sale. Not now, not ever. Please remove it from your files." Ma'am, with all due respect, properties in your neighbourhood are. I hung up, smiled, did it again when they called back. The silence after that felt different, lighter, like I'd been holding my breath for months, years maybe, and had finally remembered how to exhale. Charlotte came to the house on Sunday afternoon. I was in the garden planting tomatoes, my hands in the dirt Robert and I had mixed with compost every spring, following the same ritual we'd established before Charlotte was born. Tomatoes on the south side, where they'd get full sun, basil between them, because Robert had read somewhere that it kept pests away and he believed in folk wisdom. I heard the car door slam, heard her footsteps on the front walk, and I kept planting, pressing seedlings into earth, patting soil around roots, giving each plant space to grow. Mum. I looked up. She stood at the edge of the garden bed, in expensive shoes that weren't made for grass, her arms crossed over her chest, her face hard in a way I recognized because it was the same face I made when I was trying not to cry. Charlotte, can we talk? I stood slowly, my knees protesting, and brushed dirt from my hands. Of course. We went inside. I didn't offer tea or coffee, didn't fall into the automatic hospitality that would have let us pretend this was a normal visit. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. She sat across from me in the same chair where she'd done her homework at 9 years old, where she'd told me she was pregnant with Rose at 28, where we'd planned Robert's funeral 8 years ago, and she'd held my hand while I cried. The lawyer called, said the injunction was granted, that you revoked the POA. Yes. Mum, I was trying to help. Were you? She looked away, out the window toward the garden.
You're 76. This house is too much. What if you fall? What if you get sick? What if something happens and I'm 3 hours away and can't get here fast enough?
Then something happens, I said quietly, and I deal with it. Or I don't. But it's my choice, Charlotte, my risk to take, my life to live. That's easy to say when you're not the one who'll have to make the emergency decisions. I gave you permission to make medical decisions in emergencies, not to sell my house while I'm still healthy and capable of deciding where I want to live. You didn't even fight it at first. You signed the papers. I signed papers I was told were for medical emergencies. I trusted you. I paused, letting that word sit between us. You violated that trust. I was protecting you. No, the word came out harder than I meant it. You were protecting yourself from worry, from responsibility, from having to see me as an autonomous adult who might make choices you don't agree with. She stood up, paced to the sink, stood there with her back to me. Her shoulders were shaking. I don't know how to do this, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know how to watch you get old, how to step back when everything in me says I should be taking care of you. By taking away my choices, my home, my dignity? I didn't mean. She turned, and I saw tears on her face, real ones, Not the manipulative crying she'd sometimes done as a teenager, but actual grief. I didn't mean to take anything away. I thought I was giving you freedom from maintenance and worry, and I don't want that kind of freedom, the kind that comes with a studio apartment and scheduled meals and other people deciding when I'm allowed to have visitors. I stood up, walked to her. "Charlotte, look at me." She did. Her eyes were red. She looked younger than 53, more like the girl who'd needed me once. "I am your mother," I said carefully. "But I'm not just your mother. I'm Eleanor. I'm Robert's widow. I'm a homeowner, a taxpayer, a woman who's lived 76 years and earned the right to make my own mistakes. You don't get to take that away because it makes your life easier. It's not about easy." "Then what's it about?" Silence. Long enough that I could hear the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking, the sound of a car passing on the street outside. "I'm scared," she said finally. "I'm terrified I'll get a call one day saying you fell down the basement stairs, or had a heart attack, or forgot to turn off the stove. That I'll have to live with, knowing I could have prevented it if I'd just made you move somewhere safer. And I'm terrified," I said, "of living in a place where I'm not allowed to be myself because someone else thinks they know better. Where I'm treated like a child who can't be trusted. Where every day is designed to keep me safe but feels like dying slowly." I reached for her hand. She let me take it. "Charlotte, you can't prevent me from dying. You can only prevent me from living." She pulled away, wrapped her arms around herself. "So what now? I just pretend I'm not worried? Pretend it's fine that you're here alone in this huge house with stairs and a basement? And a yard that's too much work? You accept that it's my choice. You visit because you want to see me, not because you need to check on me. You call because we're family, not because I need supervision." I paused. "And you trust that if I need help, I'll ask for it, will you?" "I will. But Charlotte, asking for help doesn't mean surrendering my autonomy. It means partnership, not management." She sat back down heavily and put her face in her hands. We sat like that for a long time, the kitchen quiet around us, sunlight moving across the floor in that particular late afternoon way that meant spring was turning towards summer. "I don't know if I can do that," she said finally. "Stop trying to fix everything. Stop making plans. Stop worrying."
I'm not.
Asking you to stop worrying? I'm asking you to worry differently. As my daughter. Not as someone who thinks she owns me. I never thought I owned. Didn't you? I asked softly. When you signed those papers without asking me? When you decided to sell my house like I was already gone? She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the moment she heard it, heard what she'd done, saw herself through my eyes. "Oh God," her voice cracked. "Mum, I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking about how it would feel to you. I was just solving a problem, making a plan. I didn't think about me as a person with feelings and rights and dignity." Yes, barely a whisper. "I know you weren't trying to hurt me," I said. But you did. And we can't move forward until you understand why. She nodded, crying openly now, the kind of crying that wasn't pretty or delicate, just human. Can I? She wiped her face. Can I try again? Can we start over? Not over. We can't erase what happened, but we can start different. I stood, went to the counter, put the kettle on. We can have tea. We can talk like two adults. We can figure out what our relationship looks like when we're both trying to see each other clearly. She stayed for 2 hours. We drank tea. We talked about Rose, about David's business, about the garden. Normal things, small things, the kind of conversation that rebuilds slowly, one word at a time. When she left, she hugged me at the door, and it didn't feel like the old hugs, the automatic ones. It felt tentative, new, like we were learning each other again. Mum, she said before getting in her car, the house, it really is yours. I'm not going to try to sell it again. Not ever. Not unless you ask me to. Thank you, and I'll call. Not to check on you, just to talk. I'd like that. I watched her drive, away, then went back to the garden and finished planting tomatoes as the sun set and the street lamps came on and the world turned the particular shade of blue-purple that meant evening was settling in. My house stood behind me, solid and familiar, still mine, still home. 2 weeks later, I went back to Thomas Wright's office to sign a new will. The oak desk between us was covered with documents, each one carefully explained, each one a choice I was making deliberately, consciously, with full understanding of what I was doing and why. This establishes the house in an irrevocable trust, Thomas said, pointing to the relevant paragraph. Upon your death, it goes to your granddaughter Rose Brennan, bypassing your daughter Charlotte entirely unless Rose predeceases you. There's a provision allowing you to live in it rent-free, for life, and another provision allowing Rose to sell it only with your written consent while you're alive. I signed my name in careful strokes, Eleanor Marie Hartley, the signature I'd practiced at 16 in my school notebooks, trying out Robert's last name before he'd even proposed. The other accounts go to Charlotte in trust for her children, he continued, but the house itself is protected. Good, Eleanor, he said. Using my first name for the first time. I'm not supposed to give personal opinions, but you're doing the right thing, protecting your autonomy and leaving something meaningful to someone who understands what it represents. I looked at this man who'd helped me reclaim my life, who'd filed paperwork and argued law and never once suggested I was being unreasonable or stubborn or difficult. Thank you, Thomas, for everything. Come back if you need anything, even just to talk. I mean that. I drove home through streets that felt different now, familiar but new, like seeing them for the first time without the weight of someone else's management pressing down on everything I looked at. Rose visited the following weekend. We planted flowers in the front garden, petunias and marigolds and the climbing roses Robert had always loved. She dug holes. While I supervised, both of us dirty and sweating and laughing when she accidentally uprooted a tomato seedling. "Grandma," she said, sitting back on her heels, "Mum told me about the will that you're leaving the house to me. Does that bother you?" "No, it makes me—" She paused, choosing words. "It makes me understand what this whole thing was really about. It's not just property, it's your life, your history, your right to decide. Someday it'll be yours. You can sell it or keep it or turn it into a commune for urban gardeners. I don't care what you do with it. I just want you to have the choice." She hugged me, garden dirt and all. "I love you, I know." That evening Charlotte called. We talked for 30 minutes about nothing important, a recipe she was trying, a problem with David's truck, Rose's new project at work. Normal conversation, the kind we used to have before everything got complicated by her fear and my invisibility. "Mum," she said before hanging up, "I'm trying, I really am, to see you differently, to treat you like a person. Yes." A pause. "I'm sorry it took me so long." "We're working on it," I said. "That's what matters." Weeks became months. Summer arrived with its particular heavy heat that made the garden smell like basil and tomatoes. Charlotte visited every few weeks, sometimes with David, sometimes alone. We developed a routine that looked like what I'd wanted all along, visits that were about connection, not supervision, conversations where she asked instead of decided. One Sunday in July, she brought a tin of cookies, the shortbread recipe Robert's mother had made, the one Charlotte had learned at 12 and hadn't made in years. "I found the recipe card in my kitchen drawer," she said, setting the tin on my counter. "Thought you might want some." We ate them at the kitchen table with tea, and they tasted like memory, like summers when Charlotte was young and Robert was alive and the future felt infinite instead of finite. "These are perfect," I said. "Grandma Rose's recipe always was." She smiled, sad and soft. I'd forgotten how much this house holds, how many memories, how many— She stopped, looking around the kitchen. How many ghosts, good ones. "Your father's here," I said quietly. "In every room, every corner. This is where he lived, where we built our life. I'm not ready to leave him yet. I understand now, I do." She reached across the table, took my hand. "I was trying to move you forward because I thought staying here meant you were stuck in the past. But it's not the past, it's your present, your home." "Yes." We sat like that for a while, holding hands across the same table where so many conversations had happened, so many meals had been shared, so many moments of ordinary life had accumulated into something that felt like grace. When she left, I walked through my house turning on lights again, not in defiance this time, but in celebration. Every room illuminated, every space claimed, every corner acknowledged. This was mine, my choice, my home, my life. The phone in the kitchen hung silent on its wall, and I remembered that first call, Charlotte's voice confirming what I'd feared and how. I'd hung up and felt something break inside me that I'd thought couldn't be repaired. But here I was, still standing, still here. I poured myself tea, Robert's strong, bitter kind, and sat in his chair by the window and watched the street outside turn purple with evening. And I thought about what I wanted to say to anyone who might be listening, anyone who might recognize themselves in this story. If you're reading this and seeing yourself, the mother who's been managed, the grandmother who's been decided for, the woman who's become invisible behind her role, listen to me. Your silence isn't kindness, it's abandoning yourself. Your no isn't selfishness, it's remembering you're a person, not a function. Your dignity doesn't expire at 70 or 80 or 90. It doesn't become negotiable just because your children are scared or your body is aging, or society decided you're too old to make your own choices. You are allowed to say no, to set boundaries, to refuse to be managed like a problem that needs solving. You are allowed to keep your home, your autonomy, your voice, even when, especially when, people who love you think they know better. It's never too late to reclaim yourself, never too late to demand to be seen. I finished my tea as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, small bright points in the vastness. And I thought about Robert and how he would have handled this, what advice he would have given. But I didn't need his advice anymore, didn't need anyone's permission or wisdom or approval. I had my own. I stood up, washed my cup, turned off all the lights except the one over. The front door that Robert always left on, because he said it meant someone was home, someone was waiting, someone was here. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my bedroom, feeling each step under my feet, solid and familiar and mine. In the morning, I would wake up in this house I'd fought for. I would make coffee in the kitchen where I'd made 46 years of coffee. I would water the garden Robert and I planted together. I would live my life on my terms, with my choices, in my space. And if someday I needed help, I would ask for it. But I would ask as Eleanor, as myself, as a woman who knew the difference between help and control, between care and management, between love and possession. I got into bed and pulled the covers up, and lay there in the darkness that felt like peace, like completion, like the end of something hard and the beginning of something new. My house settled around me with its familiar creaks and sighs, still mine, still home, still here.